in the movie, there's a scene where the father meets this woman who's staged as sort of a pietà, holding her son on her lap, and she's weeping and lamenting, and the father comes into that room, and she says, "How do you cope?" to the father. "How do you cope?" And she expects maybe some, grand answer, some definitive answer. And he says in reply, "Well, sometimes I play the guitar."
Hey there, I'm Victoria, a certified Christian life coach, author, motivational speaker, and university educator, and I am obsessed with helping you navigate through life's ups and downs so that you can live day by day in God's peace despite the many external demands on your time and energy. The Choose to Think Inspirational podcast is about the delicate dance between God transforming you from the inside out and your personal responsibility for change, maturity, and refinement as a Christ follower. On the show, I'll help you connect the dots between your faith and your life in practical, meaningful ways while giving God room to do what only He can do, and so that you can shine your light for Christ and be better equipped to serve your family and help others around you. You can change every area of your life, one thought at a time. Welcome back to the Choose to Think Inspirational podcast, Brain Changer. Let's dive in. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Choose to Think Inspirational podcast. Boy, I always say, have I got a treat for you? But you're going to be so encouraged and maybe educated today because we talk about severe mental illness. And I'm not sure how much you know about severe mental illness. Let me just read this to you. Actually, according to WHO, the World Health Organization, mental disorders affect 1 of 4 people worldwide. And this is what the director wrote. The gentleman we're interviewing today, his name is Cris Krusen, and he says, this is an issue probably close to you as well, at least to some degree. Maybe it's not in your immediate family, talking about mental disorders. Perhaps it's a cousin. It could be an aunt, an uncle far away. It might be the neighbor's son across the street. The question becomes, what do you do when you're faced with a situation as intractable as severe mental illness? Well, the approach he takes in the movie that we're going to talk about, and it's called Let Me Have My Son, is to venture down a spiritual path, bringing hope and empathy to the hurting. About Cristóbal Krusen, or Cris Krusen, he's an award-winning filmmaker, an actor, and writer, and he calls this his most personal project to date. It's Let Me Have My Son, the movie. The book is already available. About his book, it's a collection of his prayer letters to his son Daniel. And the book, Let Me Have My Son, has become words of hope and encouragement for others going through their own times of trial. So if you're one of those 1 in 4, or you know one of those 1 in 4, please buy that book. And I'm going to have the link and everything in the show notes or in the description. But it might really provide the hope that you're looking for and some validation there. Now, the film itself, Let Me Have My Son, the story of the book was transformed into a semi-autobiographical, emotional, independent film that creatively and cinematically explores a father coming to grips with his son's struggles with severe mental illness. Let me tell you more about Cris. He was born and raised in Tampa, Florida, the third of 4 children. Early in life, he showed a keen interest in literature, reading many of the classics while still in grade school and cherishing the ambition that one day he would become a writer. He entered Harvard University in 1971, majored in English literature, intent on making his mark as a poet and a novelist. He had a growing interest in photography and filmmaking, and that led him to transfer to New York University, where he changed majors and graduated with a BFA in film and television. He later attended Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, where he received his MFA in film. Now, he also founded Messenger Films back in 1988, and he's worked as a world director of film and television ever since, helming productions in more than 20 countries. He is best known for Final Solution, More Than Dreams, Undaunted, Sabina K, and most recently, Let Me Have My Son. Over the last several years, he's also begun fulfilling his childhood dream of becoming a writer. And so he's authored several of those titles as well, including Let Me Have My Son. He works in multiple languages as a filmmaker. And matter of fact, in the film itself, Let Me Have My Son, you're going to hear him speak several different languages. He's known for a poetic visual style and the ability to draw intimate performances from his actors. Above all, he is a storyteller who delights to engage his audiences while addressing the deepest needs of the human heart. And I will tell you that we talked about practical ways that he, as the father of a son, Daniel, who has mental illness, how he coped with that. He gives about 6 or 7 tangible things that you can do if you're coping with something really, really difficult in your life right now. And by the way, those coping strategies and those tips that he mentioned would apply even if you're going through something that has nothing to do with mental illness at all. If you're just in a real tough spot, or you're going through a trial or fiery test right now, you might want to put those into play. He actually challenged us as the church, as 21st century Christians. He challenged us to unpack our thoughts a little bit, our attitudes, the mindsets that we have toward individuals and their families struggling with mental illness. So he challenges us on that during this episode. If you stay tuned, you're going to figure out what my favorite scene of the movie is. I did get to share some of that, and it's just absolutely beautiful. So the topic can feel a little heavy because it's a serious issue, and it strikes to the heart and the home of so many of us. So let this be an encouragement to you. Make sure you share this episode with someone else. Please support Chris's ministry, his messenger films, as well as go see the movie, buy the book, buy the movie if it's already been shown. Make sure you get your hands on a copy of that. If it's not an issue that you're facing, gift that to someone else. So let's support Christian media, faith-based media, in any way we possibly can. So put on your seatbelt, because here we go, and here's Cris. Well, welcome, Cris, to the podcast. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, I have wrestled just a little bit with this interview, partly because it is such an important topic. It's also a very, very sensitive topic that we're going to be discussing in some way. So I'm hoping that you're going to be able to just kind of take the lid off for us on the issue of mental health and dealing with mental issues. I want to start out by reading to our audience a little bit of what you've written, and we're going to kind of segue into all of that. And then I have a feeling that after we kind of beat around on this a little bit, we'll all feel a little bit better. Okay, so this is something that you've written. And by the way, everyone knows, because I've read your bio, they know all about you, but the fact that you're a director, you're the writer, you're in this film, all of that together, what astounding gifts God has given you, just so spectacular in all your languages. I just loved it. So this is what you said about Let Me Have My Son, the title of your movie. It's based on your personal experience coming to grips with your firstborn son's struggles with severe mental illness. Daniel has suffered. That's your son. His family has suffered, yet all your troubles and heartaches shall be redeemed. Of that you're sure. You say that you're sure. The hope of the resurrection is not a consolation prize. It is the cornerstone of the Christian faith and represents the very heartbeat of the movie. Do you want to kind of unpack it a little bit and give a little of your history and kind of tell us about Daniel, about you, about this journey?
Sure. It's a long journey. Daniel recently turned 40, and the onset of his mental illness was when he was about between 16 and 17 years old. Except for 2.5 years, give or take, from that time when he was 17, he has had to be institutionalized. I will say on the positive side that he has shown remarkable improvement these last couple of years, and we're very hopeful. Even before the movie is released or coinciding with the release of the movie, he'll be discharged from the hospital.
Wow.
Where he's been 12 years. I didn't engineer any of that, the timing. You speak Spanish. It's a diosidencia, like a God coincidence.
Oh, I love that.
So that kind of gets to the heart of your question. When you read that, the emphasis you gave, rightly so, was on the resurrection, which is the cornerstone of our Christian faith. It has been my hope in the resurrection, certainly, that has kept me going as a father. That's been a huge motivation for me and a huge relief for me to contemplate this world is not the end all. We embrace that hope. There would be no gospel if there had not been a resurrection. There would be no gospel. Paul said he'd have nothing to preach.
Right.
Because Christ was raised from death, we do have hope. There is a gospel message. I have the hope that no power in heaven, on earth, or under the earth can take away. And that is the hope that I will be reunited with my son, and he will be perfectly well, and so will I. And I don't know, how old will we be? Late 20s, early 30s, no gray hair, whatever. I don't pretend to understand those things. But what I do believe with all my heart is that everything's going to be made right. In the film, I quote the scripture in Revelation that, God will wipe away every tear, and there will be no more crying and no more pain and no more suffering, because all things will be made new. So that has been very operational. That point of view, that perspective, that position has been very intentional on my part, but also very comforting, and has carried me through, and others in my family, these difficult times. I could go on and on. It's just been, a very long story, but I'll pause to see what you'd like to ask me.
Well, what I'm wondering, Cris, is how do you actually do that? We all have the hope of the resurrection, but on a daily basis, what difference does that make in your life? In other words, let's say you're in the midst of this battle, and as far as with dealing with the severe mental illness that for your son that Daniel has. And I'm sure there were days that were particularly excruciatingly difficult for you.
Right.
So what literally did you do to get back into that focus of, yes, I have the hope of the resurrection? In other words, did you just remind yourself of that over and over and again? Were there any practices that you had, practically speaking?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'd like to answer it. It's a beloved scripture. Everybody will recognize it. Faith, hope, and love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. And I can tell you, in answer to your question, that I started out in the process of this journey with faith. Faith in my son's healing, faith in victory over all the forces of evil, faith over insanity, overcoming faith. But I want to be transparent with you. And I want to tell you that while that faith helped me unquestionably and carried us through some very dark times, it eventually began to peter out, to run dry. And that's where hope entered in. For me, I don't know if it's a coincidence or what, but the order of those three words, faith, hope, love. So I kind of migrated over from faith as the dominant spiritual force undergirding me in all of this to hope. And I don't take credit for that, because frankly, I would say I received a revelation, an epiphany. It was a deep insight that I received one night when I was in Mexico. We moved to Mexico for a period of time, looking for a better situation for Daniel. And we found it for a time. He lived at home in Mexico for a year. And I really thought, wow, we're out of the woods now. He even stopped taking medication and altogether, and he was doing so much better. for months. He was just, felt like I had my son back. And then he had
Wow.
this terrible relapse. It was not short-lived. It went into the months and months and years. It was very, very difficult time. And it was during that dark time that I really felt the Lord speak to me, not in an audible voice, but in my heart, in my spirit. And I felt God almost ask me the question, what is the resurrection to you? What does it mean to you? And I said, well, it's the hope of everything being put right. And I felt that God was telling me, hold on to that hope. Don't let it go. That hope will carry you through. And I did. I just seized onto that hope. And hope, I don't think hope gets enough credit in Christian circles. We talk about faith, talk about love, and of course they're important, don't get me wrong. But I wish we talked more about hope, because hope has certainly kept me going through some very dark times. And hope is, it's beautiful. It's so reassuring. It's like that, like the father taking the child's hand and saying, hey, it's going to be okay. I know it's difficult now, but it's going to be okay. It's going to work out. And then the hope eventually transitions into love. And love covers a multitude of sins. Love is perfection. It's the greatest of the three. The greatest of these is love.
Casts out all fear.
Exactly. Casts out all fear, and it makes everything right. So now, with God's help and by his grace, I'm able to, well, on the one hand, rejoice in my son's soon discharge from the hospital, which is a gift in the here and now. But the love seals the hope that it really will be okay. It really is going to be okay. And that's where I stand.
Wow. Such a beautiful picture. I love that. I think I'll remember that also. Faith, hope, love. Thank you for also explaining this progression in your own personal journey. It's very beautifully said. I really like that idea. So I'm going to pull back though to, let's say someone is feeling without hope and discouraged or disappointed. And I know you felt those ways.
Oh, yes.
So what helped you to kind of hang on to that hope, that cord, really? How did that just vet out in your life on a day-to-day basis? Was it just an issue of reminding yourself of those scriptures? In other words, was it prayer? What helped you remain hopeful? And I know it wasn't all you, that God was also intimately involved in that, degree of maturity, or whatever we might call it, or just that journey. He's involved in all of that. What helped you the most? Was it talking with someone, or just your relationship with God? Was that just like enough for you, or was there something else?
A great question. And I'll just start how you ended, saying, while God is our all sufficiency, I don't think it would offend him if I said, Lord, I need to be able to talk to others, And certainly I did. The book, Let Me Have My Son, which was written before the movie was ever thought of, frankly. Before I ever thought of making a movie about this, I wrote this book called Let Me Have My Son, which is a collection of prayer letters that were sent out initially to a small group of people, just a few friends. And I was simply just telling them what was going on and asking them for their prayers, And then it grew over time to hundreds of people receiving. I would typically send a prayer letter out once a month. And I did that for years, several years. And it sort of created this community of people. If I didn't send out a prayer letter, I'd sometimes get emails, where's your prayer letter at? What's going on now? They were invested, and they wanted to know what was going on, and they were committed. In fact, I could even say, the good news that we're experiencing right now, and we pray that it will become a reality, this discharge from the hospital, I have to trace it back to those prayers being answered,
Wow.
But, I would like to sort of introduce a lighter tone to this question a bit, because, at the end of the day, we're all human. And I think humor, us having a sense of humor, is very beneficial. In the most dramatic of movies, there's often a delightful, in a good movie, there's often a delightful bit of humor, a character, and there's some dialogue that makes you laugh a little bit while you're wiping away the tears or on the edge of your seat. I've tried to keep it real, and also playing the guitar. Like in the movie, there's a scene where the father meets this woman who's staged as sort of a pietà, holding her son on her lap, and she's weeping and lamenting, and the father comes into that room, and she says, "How do you cope?" to the father. "How do you cope?" And she expects maybe some, grand answer, some definitive answer. And he says in reply, "Well, sometimes I play the guitar." I mentioned this to you as sort of an indication of how I think one can best cope with things like this that happen in life. It's not just one monolithic answer that, like a tidal wave, just flattens everything and pushes all the debris out of the way and you're starting fresh. It's often little things along the way. Don't lose your sense of humor. Keep your openness. Go for walks. I personally try to walk every day, 4 or 5 miles.
Wow.
I miss sometimes, but I go for walks. I spend time with my grandchildren. My grandchildren are often my best teachers.
I'd say.
Yeah. So yeah, it's simple things like that, and taking time to listen to others and extend yourself. Don't just be looking in at your problems, but look out, because if you've suffered, you will have experience and sensitivity, hopefully, and empathy, where you can in turn help others. And it is more blessed to give than receive. So think of that too.
Oh, I love those. I've written all of them down. I have prayer, community, humor, expression, like artistic expression, like playing the guitar, taking walks, enjoying nature, fresh air, sunshine, vitamin D, grandchildren. Oh, the parents among us are like, oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
such a good one.
Or if
And
you're a
then
young parent and you have little kids, same thing.
enjoy them.
My point is little children. They're just amazing.
They do teach. You're right.
Yes.
I learn something all the time from mine. And then being others focused. Oh, I love those. Those are almost tangible and kind of some little nuggets that I think our audience can really hang on to. Just a little side note about the movie also. Did you intend for those two guards? I guess they were guards. I'm not gonna
Orderlies, hospital
orderlies, the really large one and then the really small one. Was that intended to be humorous?
Yes, it
Okay,
was.
it was.
It was.
My husband walked in and I'm like, look at these guards. Are these, why on earth? And so we got a little bit of a laugh out of that. So, but I found myself scratching my head. It was the dynamic in the movie. What were you hoping that the viewer would take away from your movie? What were maybe one or two takeaways? What messages did you hope were really pounded out in the movie?
One would be that journey toward empathy, where the father in the story, and it's loosely based on my life and that of my son. I call it a semi-autobiographical. The names are changed and a lot of the scenes never happen in real life, but that journey toward empathy is for me, as the creator of the film, would be a huge takeaway. I would really hope that most viewers would get that and take that away. The father, at the beginning of the story, he's obsessed with finding his son, getting help for his son, to the exclusion of others by and large. He's not a bad person, the father. He can be a little grumpy, but he's not a bad person. He sees his duty, his task, as saving his son. And that there's nothing wrong with that. That's a driver in the film. But what he discovers in the process of the journey is that when he does not find his son, what he discovers is that all these other people around him in the mental hospital where he has come to bring his son home, and there's a mystery as to why his son isn't there and why they told him to come get his son, and now they're telling him to leave without his son, and it's just bizarre, deliberately so. He reaches the point where he begins to see the humanity of the other patients who have known his son, who are ill, their mind is not right, you know, they're suffering from mental illness, and he sees into them in a way that is very empathetic, very sympathetic, almost loving. It's as if he can't find his son, whom he so longs to embrace and love, but he is able to express that same love for these others who are in need themselves. They don't have a father looking for them.
Right. Yeah.
So that's probably the biggest takeaway for me that I would hope the audience would take from the film. And then the other big takeaway for me, which has been borne out in some of the test screenings we've had and the Q&A that has followed those test screenings, is that people who are suffering or have a loved one who is suffering with a mental health condition would take some comfort from it all. That here's a man, that's me, who is telling his story to the world. He's not holding anything back. He's expressing his love for his son. It's just all out there. It's just all out there. And I've met so many people now who tell me that they're having an experience at home. Their son is going through a hard time, their daughter, their mother, their father, and that they just wept watching the film because the movie is also edifying and lifting up those who have mental illness and who are in many circles and circumstances pushed to one side and kept in the shadows to one side, because even in the church, right? Oh, we don't want to talk about mental illness here. Oh, you have a broken leg? In the name of Jesus, be healed. Right. Broken mind? Shh, we don't want to talk about that. And that's wrong. That's wrong. And I know it's wrong. I've been through it. And when somebody who is a Christian is able and who's going through a hard time sees this film, I hope that they will realize that they are not alone. They're not alone, because it can be so lonely. You can feel so lonely, and sad to say, very sad to say that it's often in the church where they're feeling lonely. They're in the church where, of all places, you'd think they would receive that understanding. Sure. It's not there. So I want to challenge church people, pastors and other church leaders, and many are already there. As you mentioned at the outset, this is a topic it dominates the news in so many ways currently. So we know that attitudes are changing and have changed, but still, I would want to push the Christian leadership in the country and perhaps around the world to be more loving in this matter and be open to helping people in a real direct and tangible way. Come alongside people who are hurting.
Right. Cris, why do you think we're resistant to doing that?
Oh, I don't know that I know, but I could venture a guess to say that two things. Historically, there's a lot of research, medical research, that has shown that these conditions have a root in the brain. And my son, Daniel, I can tell you categorically, my son is not demon possessed. He prays with me on the phone. I talk to him every day on the phone. He tells me, Dad, I love you. That's how we begin. Dad, I love you, when we hang up. He is oppressed, I guess we could say that, but aren't we all oppressed? Don't we all run a gauntlet of sin that's
Mhm.
ready to slap us down and knock us down. So yeah, so I think historical precedent is such that we look with suspicion and mistrust and fear on someone who's mentally ill instead of walking right up to them and engaging them like Jesus did with the leper, right? I think the mental illness is like the leprosy of that time, perhaps. Nobody would go near a leper. But Jesus not only went near the leper, in that occasion in the Gospel of Mark, he embraced the leper.
Mhm.
Said, I am willing, be clean. I would also just say, kind of related to that, is that the stigma is just awful. The stigma is not really abated as I think it should. But I do
Mm.
see hopeful signs. I really do. I see many hopeful signs across the board that people are giving it another look, giving it
Mm.
another look.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Is it okay if I tell you like one of my favorite parts of the movie?
Please, I'd
Is
love
that
to hear.
okay? Okay. Um, and it kind of ties into that ability to be comfortable around people who are suffering from mental illness, which was portrayed so beautifully in the show, I thought. But it was when the father walked into, I guess, Muhammad, the janitor, I think he was, led him into what was like a sanctuary of
Yes.
sorts.
Mhm.
And
That had been abandoned.
yes,
Mhm.
I thought it was brilliant when there was an old, large wooden cross that was tilted over,
Mhm.
and the father walked up to that cross and made it come aright. But as you know, as you were doing that, it was like you were carrying your cross in a way. It was so symbolic to me of that, and the weight of all of that. You were just kind of setting that cross up respectfully so. And then when you started singing or playing the guitar, the beautiful sounds that were coming, and then everyone, they came to church, really. They gathered, and the chaos, that some of the scenes were so chaotic, and I could just use that word as an example, but they were unsettling and uncomfortable. I think if I were in that scenario, I would feel uncomfortable, and I would be kind of afraid. It wouldn't be that I wouldn't want to be helpful, but maybe I would feel like I didn't know. If someone says I need to use the bathroom, do you say, like the character, just go over there and use the bathroom, stand up, sit down, doesn't matter. What do I say? What do I do? How do I behave? But anyway, back to what happened in that particular scene is that all the noise, all the unsettledness, the chaos, the hardship, it all just settled. And suddenly there was an eruption of such beauty and just the essence of compassion and love and for humankind. And it was just so beautiful. I just loved that particular scene. So it was very moving, very touching. And you do say something else, Cris. You say that you can speak from personal experience that medicine alone cannot solve the problem of mental illness. Could you talk about that a moment?
Sure. Well, it's just I suppose it's partly or largely my view on life, my philosophy on life. I'm not just a secularist. Secularism per se carries us so far. And frankly, in my view, you can be the most brilliant person in the world, but if you're only looking at the physical, materialistic approach to provide a solution, well, where is God in that? God is not in the equation. And so that's really what I meant. I'm not saying I don't believe in medicine. I'm not saying that. I do believe in medicine. I do believe in surgery. I do believe in blood transfusions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
I do. But if that's all you're focused on, to me, that's a huge miss. a huge miss, because first of all, I believe God does perform miracles still today, and he's performing miracles all the time. I'm convinced that we never see or think about. We just don't see them. He's just so infinitely merciful and compassionate. That's really what I meant. What I meant was I don't believe in medicine or the scientific approach apart from God also being part of the approach.
Gotcha. Can you tell us also, Cris, as you went through the movie, specifically producing it, acting in it, having, based on your book and so forth, were there any moments along the way that you thought, wow, this is such an important work, or I'm so glad I'm doing this work, or this is impacting me personally in a way I hadn't anticipated, this is somehow growing me? Was there any level of personal development as you went through that movie?
Well, I don't know, to be quite honest. I felt more like a shipwreck victim who was holding onto a piece of wood down in the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it agonizing for you to do that movie?
Yes. I mean, but see, part of the background to my answer is that when you make a film, it's almost a Herculean effort. It just takes everything out of you anyway.
Yeah.
So that you're starting with that, right? That making a feature-length movie is such a huge undertaking. And especially when you're doing it as an indie filmmaker, you don't have all the bells and whistles and the huge budgets that are used in Hollywood to make movies. So you're constantly scrimping and looking for ways to get something done, because the quality is also important to me. So it's almost impossible for me to let something go if I know the quality is not what it should be. But if I don't have the money to address that, I got to be creative. That's right. Obviously. But I remember toward the end of the principal photography stage, when we were finishing the filming, we had maybe another 3 or 4 days to go of shooting. And as you mentioned, I was directing, I had written the screenplay, I was acting in the lead role, and had all of these things weighing on me. And I remember at one moment just thinking, I know the script was good. And I'm just going to depend on that, like that bit of driftwood or whatever, that I found a life jacket in the sea, and that was the screenplay. And I just said, I know the script was good. Everything else is starting to blur out on me. I'll just trust that the script is going to carry us through. And that's more the honest answer to your question, I think.
I love it. Anything you would have done differently now looking back?
Oh, you should never ask a film director.
Really? That's a bad question for a filmmaker.
Oh, yes. Oh,
kind of like a writer, even, I write also. And so, once that book is published and you're like, oh, did I really put it that way? Or why didn't I include this? Or is that kind of the feeling?
Right. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Like, I remember once I made a movie where I thought this was back in the days of VHS, and the front cover of the VHS box, I did not like. The back cover I thought was much more artistic, and laid out much better, and so more interesting. And every time I would show somebody the movie, the VHS, I would show them the back of that. And then they would want to look around and I would sort of turn.
Like, what's the title? Yeah.
No, you don't want to see that part. No. Yeah. So.
Oh, that's too fun. Well, how can folks see the trailer or kind of dig a little bit deeper into this whole issue? Where do they go?
Go to letmehavemyson.com would be a good start. Letmehavemyson.com. That's the title of the movie, Let Me Have My Son. Messengerfilms.com. That's the company that produced the movie that I founded in 1988, Messenger Films. On May 24th, it premieres around the world. So it's literally around the world. We'll have it dubbed in Spanish, Portuguese. It's obviously in English already. It'll be subtitled in French and Dutch. And we'll just keep adding language versions to it.
That's
over time.
wonderful. I want to end with one more question, if that's okay.
Of course.
And I, of course, will put all the links in the show notes and the YouTube description. Why did you title it Let Me Have My Son? Because that's very dramatic. It's very poignant. There's a desperation in that
Yeah.
title. Why that title?
That literally comes from the book that I wrote long before I thought of making a movie. One of those prayer letters where my son and my other children, we were on the verge of moving to Mexico. I had become his legal guardian, so I had leverage with the state where he was a patient in Virginia. It's where he was at the time. And I wrote in my prayer letter to my community of friends and people praying. And I said, guys, for years now, you've been praying with me, you've been following these letters. And now we're at that point where I have succeeded. I'm not quoting verbatim, I'm paraphrasing,
Sure.
but where I have succeeded in convincing the coach to let me in the game by becoming my son's legal guardian. And I said, let me have my son. I could almost stress the word me because you guys have been working with him in that case for over 5 years, and you've told me he'll never leave here. You took him at the age of 18 and you've had him for 5.5 years. And now you're telling me he'll never leave the state mental hospital? No. Let me have my son. And as I said earlier, hey, for a year, it worked out really great. Then he had that relapse and I was left, on the floor, it felt like. That's where it comes from. And I'll just add to that. Yes, let me have my son, the Father's love, but the Father learns it's God, the Father, that he's the ultimate savior. It's not the earthly father. The earthly father will try, and God bless him, right? God bless him.
Right.
He has a good heart. He's trying hard. He too, the earthly father has to rest in the arms of the heavenly Father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And
Sure.
we appreciate so much that you came on the show with us today. Thank you so much, Cris.
Well, thank you. It was really a pleasure for me to be here.
And that's a wrap, Brain Changer. And listen, if you like what you hear, would you leave us a 1 to 2 sentence review at Apple Podcasts? Share the link with a friend or tag me on your share on social media. It would mean the world to me and would help us to keep shining the light of Christ and sharing the good news to others who are in need of encouragement. Please visit us on our website at choosetothink.co. That's with the number 2, choosetothink.co, to get on our monthly newsletter list. And if you need a guest speaker for your next women's retreat or church event, I'm your gal. Email me at choosetothink@gmail.com, and that's with the number 2, choosetothink@gmail.com. Finally, I offer limited free mentoring sessions each month where you and I can chat to help you develop a strategy for your thoughts in any area of your life. I'm a certified life coach and I have something to share. Visit choosetothink.co and click on mentoring for more details. Also, keep in mind that the messages on this show are for informational and educational purposes only. Please consult your medical doctor for all medical issues. Thank you again for tuning in. God bless you.